Hey, Rick here at Mathlite, and I want to talk about going about teaching the properties. How do you teach the properties to your students? Now, if you've been teaching any number of years, and for me, I've just started my 31st year, 25 years ago, the properties weren't as important, and they didn't come up a whole lot, a little bit. Now they come up all the time. It's important that your students know the basic properties. And I just want to talk about four real quickly here today. The commutative property, the associative property, the identity property, and then the inverse property. So how do you teach these properties? Well, I teach them with a word association. And I think if you'll do this, you'll really help your students to remember the properties and get them straight. And you can talk about them 3 courses down the road and perhaps Algebra 2 and mention, for example, the keyword order, and your students will still say, hey, that's commutative. All right, so without any further ado, let me just quickly mention them. All right, so the first property there you recognize as the commutative property. And of course, we know it's the commutative property because we know A plus B equals B plus A. Well, that's just a bunch of letters to our students. And really, you know this if you've been teaching for any amount of time, as soon as you get to variables, your students can lose their minds. And it's the letters that really give them trouble. Well, I try to teach them the concept of a first number plus a second equals a second plus the first. You can change the order. And really the whole key there is getting them the concept of order. Hey, when you think order change, then you think commutative. Whether you're talking addition or multiplication, it doesn't matter. If you change the order, then you're using the commutative property. Well, the second one, of course, the associative property. And when you think of associations, you think groups. And so the key word there is grouping. And I tell my students, hey, you can change the grouping. It's exactly what happened. Left-hand side of the equal sign, the B is grouped with the C. On the right-hand side of the equal sign, that grouping has changed, and now the B is grouped with the A. So what does the associative property allow you to do? Change the grouping. Again, whether it's all addition or all multiplication, the concept is the same. If the grouping changes, then it is the associative property, so changing the grouping. What do I do with the identity, third one there in blue? Well, I talk to them about being back to the original. All right, so that's more than just a single word, but it's a concept that they can remember, back to the original. And so when my students see that you end up where you started, back at the original, they know it's the identity. Of course, A plus 0 equals A. Hey, back to the original, it's the identity. A times 1 equals A, back to the original, you've got the identity. And then the last one, of course, the inverse. This one a little bit harder to come down with a succinct teaching, but I tell them adding opposites and multiplying by reciprocals. So the properties. Hey, use some word associations with them to help your students understand. Because I just got to tell you, if you leave it all to the letters, the variables, your students aren't going to understand. And so help them out with, you can change the order, you can change the grouping back to the original, and of course that's going to leave the inverse, adding opposites or adding reciprocals.